It's a privilege to be able to do this because I love talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So here's what I thought I would do it this way. I'm sort of going to jump around just a little bit, but you do have sort of like that syllabus that Matthew gave you that you can follow along and just jot notes down. This is what my notes look like, so there was no way that I could have had Matthew give them to you. And my purpose, what I'm going to try to do is go through not the stuff that we've heard, ever since Sunday school, but look specifically of God's working from then till now and the supernatural working, the supernatural stuff that took place all through here, okay? And let me just say this. When I was growing up, starting from kindergarten, I went to the Jewish Foundation School on Staten Island. And one of the things that we did every day is we brought in pennies and we put them in these little, what looked like a box of, I'm going to get that for you?
That's right.
That looks, that's all right.
Thank you.
I can bend. And we used to put them in these jars that looked like a box of Band-Aids that had the Jewish Israeli flag on them. And those pennies were to plant trees in Israel, because in 1948 is when Israel became a nation again. And while they were promised all of the promised land, they wound up getting 1/6 of 1% of the Middle East land. And 60% of that land was arid wasteland, desert. So Israel began planting trees, and to this day they planted over 300 million trees in Israel, and as a result changed the whole ecosystem over Israel, causing it to rain in places and for there to be lush gardens and fields and crops. And now they're the second, and which Ezekiel said they would be. Ezekiel said they would go from being a barren wasteland to feeding the nations, and they're the second largest exporter of fruits and vegetables, which is just incredible. So my love for Israel began when I was just a small child. My father is a Holocaust survivor who was smuggled out of Romania through the Holland Underground, made it to Ellis Island. That's why I grew up on Staten Island. So when I read this stuff and when I speak of this stuff and think of this stuff, it's not what I know. It really is who I am. And I knew when I became saved that the Lord would have to tell me when I could go to Israel. And I'd wanted to for year after year after year, decade after decade. And then one morning, I woke up after having a dream about being in Israel. And then I came out of the bedroom, and Sam Nadler, if you guys know Sam Nadler, Word of Messiah Ministries, his newsletter was sitting there, and I was reading it about a doctor in Charlotte who just got saved and gave her life to the Lord, a Jewish doctor. And then I walked out. My office was outside my house around the corner. I walked out to my office that morning. It was a Sunday morning before church, and I pulled up my screen, and there was an email from Bill Hodges that had been on my computer for maybe like 3 weeks. Just been too busy to read it. I knew it was a personal email, not a business email. And I figured, okay, I'll just see what Bill's saying. And what it was a video, a slideshow of Israel playing Jewish music. And I just said, Lord, when are you going to let me go to Israel? And just out of the blue, he just said, now. So right away, I called some friends of mine who lived in Jerusalem. And then I called Jackie. And when Jackie came to church a couple of Sundays later, however long it was in church, she handed me the tickets. And I literally just broke down crying like a baby. I hadn't cried like that since I was yelling at a Bible saying, break his bones, prove he's not the Messiah. And I got in my car. I had to just get out of there. I got in my car and I cried the whole way home, holding these tickets, and I just said, Lord, why? Why is this having this effect on me? And the Lord said, because you're going back to where your DNA started. And Abraham is the father of many nations. And Abraham has, on the earth today, around 15 million children of Jewish descent. And then all the believers. So this really is, just by its nature, just a supernatural story, the kind of story that only God can do. So let me take you back here. Moses, we believe, and I saw in Matthew's notes, Moses wrote the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. You probably talked about that last week, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses wrote those while he was going through the wilderness, and those books are called the Torah today, and they're the most holy books in Judaism. Matter of fact, you cannot take the Torah and touch it. You cannot even put your finger on it and read as you're going through and reading. You have to have what looks like a back scratcher, a little hand there, and that's how you touch it. That's how holy that those scriptures are. And we believe, or we've been taught, that a couple of fallacies. One is that Abraham begins in Genesis chapter 12, okay? But here's what's interesting. If you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, you see this. Everybody know where I'm going with this? Genesis 3:15? Seed of Abraham. It says, the whole purpose of God calling Abraham to be the first Jew and to create the Jewish race was for a single purpose. The single purpose was the bringing of the Messiah and the return of the Messiah. Okay? God said he chose Abraham, he chose the Jews, not because they were the greatest of the people, but because they were the least of the people. The scripture we talk about all the time when Jesus says, when you've done this to the least of my brethren, you've done this unto me, he's speaking specifically of the Jews, the least of the brethren. And he said not that we were so great and good looking, even though we are, but because we were a stiff-necked people, an obstinate people, a proud people. And so it was everything wrong about us that caused us to be chosen, because it showed that it was everything right about God. If God had chosen a great and mighty, if he had chosen the nation, of the British Empire, well, you could say, yeah, they had the ability to do great things within themselves. But he chose the least of these. That's a supernatural event. That's a supernatural intervention. We also talk about how God called Abraham to go somewhere, and he didn't know where he was going. It comes from chapter 12. The Lord said to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. So we have Abraham obeying God by faith. Okay, this is even before the promise. But he obeyed God, and he picked up his family and his comfort and everything else, and he went to a place that he didn't know. But have you ever noticed, going back a chapter, in chapter 11, verse 32 or 31, it says, and Terah took his son, that's Abraham's dad, took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. This is cool, isn't it? In other words, before Abraham, who was justified by faith, believed God and obeyed God, before God ever came and spoke to him, there's this father who is not a Jew. He doesn't know anything about God. God didn't reveal himself to him. And yet Abraham's father took the family out of the home and headed to Canaan. Now where's Canaan? Canaan's the place that God eventually told Abraham to go. Isn't that interesting? Again, I just want to, the whole time we go through this, I want to bring out the supernatural intervention. Isn't it so cool that God doesn't say he called Abraham's father to go to Canaan, but yet God did. He put it in Abraham's father's heart to head them over to Canaan. But they didn't get there. They didn't fulfill where they were heading to. They stopped in Haran, and that's where they stayed and they dwelled. And then God comes to Abraham and calls him and says, hey, keep going. This is the promised land. This is Canaan. This is where I'm taking you. Isn't that cool? By the way, I'm cool with you guys asking questions, but I do have a lot to cover, so if I say something like, wow, we got too many questions going here, we better start sticking to this, don't be offended. But if you have any questions, we're good with it, okay? So let's start with that. Genesis 11:31 is where we first see God putting it into Abraham's father's heart when he didn't even realize it. When I got saved, it was because I was actually moving to Louisiana to deal drugs. That's what I was going to do. A friend of mine had robbed a pharmacy, stole 2,000 hits of speed, and we were heading to Louisiana to make some money. Now, I believed that I was going to Louisiana to deal drugs. And just before I left, the weirdest thing happened to me. All of a sudden, I got all messed up about it, and I was only 18 years old. I got all messed up about it, and I said, Mom, I don't, because it was literally one day here, and then the next day we're leaving for Louisiana. And I said, Mom, I don't want to go. And my mom goes, she's crying, she goes, you don't have to go. And I said to her, yes, I do. And I had no idea why I said, yes, I do. I had no idea why I knew I had to go to Louisiana. But yet it was in Louisiana that the Lord revealed himself to me, and that's where I got saved and came back knowing my Messiah and being able to lead the rest of my family to the Lord when I got back to New York. So in our lives, we are people that want the will of God in our life. We're the people that want to know his will, and sometimes we really strive over that. Oh, what does God really want from me? Think about this. If Abraham's father, if me before I was saved, if you before you were saved, were put on paths that led you to where God eventually wanted you to be, how much more can you have confidence that the path you're walking on, if you're seeking the Lord, is taking you to where you want to go? That you're literally living with supernatural intervention in your life. Now here's something, this is my own little theory here, but I got it when I was in Israel, and I believe it's really the Lord. So this is cool, listen to this. The first man was Adam. It was 2,000 years from the first man to Abraham, okay? Abraham, the first Jew. Then it was another 2,000 years from the first Jew to the Messiah. Now it's been about another roughly 2,000 years since Messiah. Okay, how many years is that? 6,000. What is the number of man? 6. Now, what happens after the number of the days of man are over? The millennium, the 1,000-year reign. Okay, 6 days it took God to create the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th he rested. 6 is the number of man, and man has been here for about 6,000 years. And then, when man is done, we rest, in the millennial rest, for 1,000 years, and it's over. So, again, this is, what year is this? Rosh Hashanah is Sunday. The Jewish New Year begins, and I think it's actually like 5,765 on the Jewish calendar. But however it is, because nobody can be exact on this, however it is, we're pretty darn close to 6,000 years. Now, pretty darn close could be 100 years away. So we could be 100 years before the Lord comes back. We don't know. But the idea that we're so close to the number of man being completed before the day of rest coming in is really exciting. Now here's something really cool. Actually, I said it was 2,000 years. It was 1,948 years when Abraham was born. His birthday was, June 1st, 1,948 years.
In 1948. It was 1948.
1948.
Yeah.
What happened in 1948? Right? Okay, on May 14th, 4:32 in the afternoon, right? Ben Gruen stands up and declares Israel a nation, and they break out in Hatikvah, Hope Song. In 1948, you think God maybe had something to do with that? I mean, isn't that just so cool? From Abraham, who starts the race of the Jews in 1948, to God fulfilling his promise to bring them back in 1948. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Wow.
It really, isn't that, I mean, again, everything I wanted. Isn't that so cool?
That is awesome.
Yeah. So, again, coincidence or divine intervention?
Yeah.
Supernatural intervention of God.
Stein,
Yeah.
why is the Hebrew calendar not closer to 6,000? It's 57.
Yeah,
whatever.
well, and I really don't know. Only, we go by a solar calendar, they go by a lunar calendar, and they don't have leap year. Leap year didn't exist back then, and so on and so forth. So I really don't know exactly why, but based on when they started, tracking time, which from the beginning, that's where they're at. So, knock a couple of hundred years off here, not, like we say 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, but really 1948, so we lose 52 years there, that kind of a thing. And I'm sure all different scholars would say, no, this is the year, that's the year. We really just don't know.
Dean, what do you mean by 6 is the number of man?
In like the number 3 is trial, like 8 is completion, 7 is, or 8 is new beginnings. Words have, 7 is completion, 8 is new beginnings, 6 is man. In the Bible, numerology, not Kabbalah, but numerology, there's different numbers have different meanings. Like for instance, on the 6th day, God created man.
Okay, thank
yeah.
you.
666, obviously.
The number of the, right. Okay, so when we talk about Abraham and we talk about election, basically that's the supernatural intervention. Even before Abraham with his dad, even the timing of when he was born, that's the intervention. Okay. Now let's go to promise here. All right. If you are at a place in your life where you can do something yourself, then you don't need to stand on the promises of God. So many times when the Lord gives us a task that's beyond ourselves, it's when it rattles us. How in the world are we going to do it? Yet, I love those times because those times take all the pressure off me to perform. Because I can just, sit back and just say, hey, unless God does it, I can't do it. So I don't have to be rattled by it. And if the promises that you're holding on to are promises you can do in your own strength, throw them out. They're not God. Honestly, they're not God. God doesn't give you a promise for Him to perform something in your life that you can perform yourself. He gives you the ones you can't perform yourself. That's why you need Him to perform. But isn't it cool that Abraham believed that he was done? I'm 100 years old. I ain't fathering any kids. You know he fathered a bunch after Isaac? Yeah. Yeah, it's like, hey man, let's keep this thing rolling. We're on a roll here. Yeah. I mean, that's to me that's incredible. Righteousness by faith. I can't wait to get to covenant. But Genesis 15:16, okay? Even during the time of the law, okay? Remember now, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has 12 children, by the way, and it's not Joseph who the lineage comes through, it's Judah, okay? And it's not Levi, the priest that Jesus came through, but it was Judah. And you know what Judah means?
Praise.
Praise. Isn't that so cool? Judah means praise. So we've got all those, and then I'm just going to jump ahead here, and then Joseph goes to Egypt, and then he saves everybody, and then in Egypt, they're in there, and how many years was everybody in Egypt? How many years were they slaves?
400.
400, 430? Not true, okay?
300.
It's just trying to teach you all this stuff. From the time of the promise given to Abraham to the Exodus was 430 years. From the time of Egypt in bondage to the Exodus was only 210 years. Isn't that pretty cool? So if you go through the timeline and the chronology, you'll see that they were not in bondage for 430 years, but from the time of the promise to the time of entering into the promised land was 430 years. Okay? And then when they come into in the wilderness before they get to the promised land, that's when Moses comes on the scene as far as going up and getting the law. So we realize that Abraham wasn't under the law, was he? Isaac wasn't under the law. We think about Noah being Jewish. Anybody, what was that movie that Steve Carell, I love Steve Carell. What was that movie he was in?
Evan Almighty.
Was it? No, the other one.
It was Evan Almighty.
Bruce
about
Almighty.
Evan Almighty.
Bruce Almighty.
No, Evan Almighty, you're right, it was Evan Almighty. And I don't know if any of you
Yeah.
caught this, but he goes in when he's all dressed up like Moses and everything, and he goes in the refrigerator and he goes, don't we have any unleavened bread?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny, but you know what? Unleavened bread didn't come till years later, because Noah wasn't Jewish. Noah wasn't worried about the Passover or eating unleavened bread. Noah had 3 sons, Ham, who wasn't kosher, Shem, Japheth and Shem. Well, Shem,
They weren't the Three Stooges.
yeah. But that's where Shem became the Shemites, which is where the name Semite, or as we know, anti-Semite, those against the Jews. So the lineage came through Shem that Abraham came through.
Remind us all what else that Moses brought down from the mountain besides the 10 Commandments.
What else he brought down?
Uh-huh.
All right, he brought down the 10 Commandments.
Plans for the
Oh, tabernacle.
tabernacle.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right, throwing me off.
No. I've heard it
A
said
veil?
that nobody remembers, no, I've heard it said that nobody ever really mentions that.
Yeah,
So, you know.
yeah.
And the other thing I was, made a connection with that I had never made a connection before, but remember the thing about Noah and being, and they carried a robe in and covered him up?
Backwards, right.
Who was the one that
Yeah.
that looked upon him?
Ham,
Oh, it was.
wasn't it? I may be
Oh,
wrong.
Shem.
No.
No, it wasn't
No.
Shem, it was Ham.
See, you always try to
Ham.
blame it on the Jews. Okay. No, it definitely wasn't Shem. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Ham. Yeah, yeah, which is why he's not kosher today.
That's why
Okay,
he's not kosher.
that's right. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and remember that Abraham tithed to Melchizedek, okay? That's another thing when people talk about, well, tithing was the law. We're not under the law anymore, we're under grace. Now, my personal feeling is that God loves a cheerful giver. That's how we should be in our giving. That's one of the criteria for giving. More than 10%, it's the cheerful giving. And it's actually, the word means like hilarious, okay? It also says those that are led by the Spirit of the law are the sons of God. So our giving should be led by the Spirit, okay? I think 10% is a great guide, but when people say that we've done away with the tithe because we're done away with the law, remember, Abraham tithed hundreds of years before the law ever came into being. It's not a law thing. It was something that God instituted. Yes?
Can I just add something to that? I noticed in the ark that the cattle was brought in by sevens.
Because it was
And-
clean.
Right, but, so they already had a concept of clean animals before the law. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That is real good. Yeah, that's real good. Okay, so now let's get
They
into
have some of the
this
sacrifice
covenant
when
thing,
they were
okay? The covenant is so important. I want you to think about this. This is just mind-blowing. Can you think of any other people on the face of the earth? And there's been the Aztecs, and there's been, just on and on and on, all of these peoples and nations throughout history. Can you think of any people that were dispersed out of their land to the four corners of the earth for 2,000 years? And yet, they maintained their bloodline,
That's amazing.
they maintained their religion, they maintained their traditions. 100 years before being brought back to their land, they had their language resurrected by a guy by the name of Eliezer ben Yehuda. And then they come back to the same exact geographical location that they were dispersed from 2,000 years ago. Does that not just blow you away? I mean, it's beyond human comprehension that something like that could happen. Remember when Jesus looked on Jerusalem, he cried. And he said, if I could gather you under my wings like a hen hugs her chicks, because you're about to be destroyed, is what he said. In Daniel chapter 9, talking about the 49 weeks, Daniel talks about that, and to the day, by the way, to the day when they do the calendar, from the time the order is given to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now remember, the order was given to rebuild the temple. Then the order was given again to beautify the temple, and then through Nehemiah, the order was given to build the walls. Only one time was that ever done. And from the time the order was given to build the walls, which would be like 70 years after Daniel's dead that order's given, so he doesn't even really know, and he says that Messiah will come in, be cut down, destroyed, and then the temple destroyed again. Now wait a minute. When Daniel said that, there was no temple, because in 586 BC, that temple had already been destroyed on a date called Tish B'Av, okay? And then in 70, and he's prophesying, not only will that temple be rebuilt, but he's prophesying it will be destroyed again. And if you take the days and the years and take out leap year and all the other things, you come to April of 33 AD, when Messiah entered Jerusalem in triumph on that donkey. Is that not just mind-blowing? No other person in the world could be the Messiah, because only Jesus came during the prophesied time that he would come. Yeah.
What was that year?
33 AD. 33 AD in April, when he came into Jerusalem on that Passover. That is just so awesome. But Daniel was prophesying that that temple would be destroyed again. And, ironically, on Tish B'Av, the same date,
Wow.
in 70 AD, that temple was destroyed. Did you know in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and Columbus was Jewish. Seriously, Columbus was Jewish. His family during the Inquisition converted to save their lives, but Columbus, in his own diary, that's why he was taking the gold to Jerusalem. He wasn't a hoarder like our history books say he was. He was wanting to take it back to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem. But in 1492, Isabel and Ferdinand kicked all Jews off of Spanish soil. Did you know that? No more Jews could be in Spanish soil on Tish B'Av. And it just goes on and on and on all the terrible destruction that happened on Tish B'Av, which was around July, August, depending on the month. Okay, so then the Jews are destroyed again in 70 AD, and then there's one more revolt about 110 AD by a guy by the name of Bar Kokhba. And a lot of people believed, and the Jews who believed in Jesus as Messiah fought side by side with the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus as Messiah in this last battle for Jerusalem. And this guy Bar Kokhba was leading them. Well, then they started saying that Bar Kokhba was Messiah. And so there became a rift between the believing Jews and the non-believing Jews, because they said, we're not following this guy, he's not our Messiah, we know Jesus, Yeshua is our Messiah. And that was that rift, and that basically, that uprising was put down, and that was the end. After that, there was only a remnant left in Israel. Everybody else had been scattered. And like I say, to the fourth, and they start coming back and coming back and coming back. And now there's about over 5 million Jews in Israel. Isn't that just, and what did God say? He said you'd be destroyed, you'd be dispersed, but my promise to you, my covenant to you, my supernatural intervention is when all hope is lost, when it's totally impossible, not only will I preserve you as a people, but I will bring you back to that land. Now, why throughout history did the Egyptians try to kill the Jews? Why throughout history did Haman try to kill the Jews? Why did the Assyrians try to kill the Jews and the Babylonians try to kill the Jews? Why throughout history is this little insignificant group of people that lived in this little insignificant plot of land, why were they target number one to be wiped out and destroyed? Do you know why? Because of God's promise to Abraham that the Messiah would come through them. Satan knows if he can wipe out them, he can keep Messiah from coming. So now, why, after Messiah comes, are the Romans trying to destroy the Jews, and the Hellenistic Greeks trying to kill the Jews, and the Turkish Ottoman Empire trying to kill the Jews, and Iran and Pakistan and Iraq and everybody else trying to kill the Jews? Why did Hitler almost be successful in killing the Jews? Why is it still the target on their foreheads?
They don't believe it.
Jesus said, until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, I won't return. That's why Satan is trying to wipe out the Jews. That's why Ahmadinejad is up there chanting his stupidity like he really can destroy the Jews. Have you not read about Haman, who's right from Persia, which is where you are? You know, but that's why. So this covenant, this promise, and so for the people that say that the Jews are no more and that God left Israel and the Christians are the New Jerusalem and this replacement theology stuff, if you believe in replacement theology, how sad for your promise. Because if God's not going to keep his promise to his chosen people, is he going to keep it to anybody else? If God can't be counted on to be faithful to the Jews, can he be counted on to be faithful to us or to you? No. But he is faithful, and so he is faithful. And that promise is he will not come back and set his feet in Times Square, you know, or on Mount Olympus, or on any other place in the world. He will set his feet on the Mount of Olives. If you go to Israel, this is really cool. You're standing on the Mount of Olives and you see the walls around Jerusalem. They were actually built about 550 years ago at the end of the Ottoman Empire. But when you look at the Eastern Gate, it's so cool because they've sealed it up with concrete. And then they built a Muslim cemetery in front of it. And the idea was, well, this Messiah guy is supposed to be coming through the Eastern Gate. We'll keep him out. And then we know a holy man won't walk through a cemetery, so we'll put a cemetery in front of it. We'll make sure that we keep him out. Isn't that awesome how they even believed? They even believe. So the covenant, to me, it's just when you see what is in Israel today after 2,000 years, God is a covenant-keeping God. He can be trusted. And he never forgets. Wouldn't you forget a promise you made 2,000 years ago? You know? Or 4,000 years ago? Yeah, yeah. He never forgets. He never forgets. Did you know he says he wrote his name in Jerusalem? It's his city. And if you're standing on the promenade and you're looking down, you see the Kidron Valley coming this way. And then you see the Cheesemakers Valley coming this way. And the Valley of Anan, where they sacrifice with Baal, coming this way. And the shape makes the letter Shem, which is the name, Shem, name of God. He literally wrote his name on Jerusalem in the valleys, and it's clear to see. It's so cool. It's so cool. All right, so we got a lot to do, don't we? Okay, let's go to Isaac. I heard Byron preach on Isaac once. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever heard on Isaac. Isaac's in between, you know? We know Abraham, we know Jacob. What's Isaac's place? Well, Isaac may have not had any more of a place than just to be the link between Abraham and Jacob, you know? And that's cool. Got his name in the Bible, right? And he was a really great guy because he allowed himself to be sacrificed, not knowing that the ram would be there, right? I mean, really, it's easy to do that if you know the end of the story, but when you're in the middle of it, going through, you know, it's sort of like when you're in a trial.
13?
Was that what they say, that he was about that age?
Well, I think it's in the Bible. Like,
That he was, yeah.
I think that's
That
right.
may be why bar
It's not
mitzvahs
like
are.
he was a little toddler.
Right, oh, right, right.
He knew what was
Yeah,
going
well,
on.
hey,
Yeah,
you
no,
could
I
carry
thought he
the
was
wood,
even older than that, but.
right?
Maybe so.
Yeah. And by the way, did you know that Mount Moriah, when you look at pictures of Israel and you see what I call the abomination of desolation, the dome, that where that is, that's Mount Moriah. Did you know that? And that where that dome is where they say under there, that's where the temple was, and that's where the Holy of Holies was, and that's where Abraham offered up Isaac. But what a lot of scholars believe is that this little porte-cochere that's to the right, if you're standing at the eastern gate looking west, that little porte-cochere to the right is really the place where the Holy of Holies were, and that they got it wrong. And then if you stand at the eastern gate, and you're right at the gate, you look straight forward, the temple is, the mosque there is to the left. The porte-cochere is straight ahead. So there's a lot of things that they got it wrong, and they built it in the wrong place, and that Holy of Holies place is still there. The rabbis in Israel don't want the Jews going up there because they're afraid they might step on the place where the Holy of Holies were. Again, going back under the law.
Wow.
When I went up, they told me to take my yarmulke off, so I did until I got up there, and then I put it back on. And then they told me that you're not allowed to talk or pray, so I walked around the mosque going, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto V'Olam Va'ed, which means, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord, He is one. Bless His name forever and ever. And then the guards started kind of following. But anyway, so Isaac. But let me just give you a supernatural intervention from Isaac, okay, to look at the life of Isaac. So Abraham's a dad, and like any dad, you want to get a good wife for your son. So Abraham calls his servant, and he tells his servant to go out and look for a wife. And the key to find out if she's the right wife is that she will basically say, I'll water your, what is it? I'll water your camel, or give water to you and your camels also. And if you ever have heard the teachings on that, it's like a ridiculous amount of water. It wasn't like, a bowl for the dog. It was like, massive amounts of water per camel. So this was a real labor of love. But what he was looking for was a person who wasn't self-centered, but a person that was saying, for you, a person who was giving of themselves. Sort of John F. Kennedy, that's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That kind of a thing, okay? So, and then he puts a ring. He gives her a ring, okay? He gives her a ring here. And then when he finally brings her back to Isaac, he puts the ring on his finger, and then he knows her biblically in the tent, okay? So we have a heavenly Father who wants a bride for his only begotten Son, Jesus. And so he sends out his Holy Spirit, because remember, none of us come to the Father but through Jesus. And none of us come to Jesus except for that we're wooed by the Holy Spirit. So the Father sends out the Spirit to draw us to his Son. And who is he looking for? Not for people that say, hey God, what can you do for me? But the servants' hearts that coming to him broken and saying, I give it all up. I turn my life over to you. And when that happens, we get a portion, don't we? We get a lot here on earth, but nothing like when we will then meet him and be joint heirs with everything that he has in his tent in heaven. Isn't that an awesome picture? That is just, it's so cool. That's another supernatural intervention.
Hey Dean, can I add to that real
Yeah.
quick? In Genesis 24, when Abraham is sending out the servant to go find the bride for Isaac, here's another really cool thing that stands out to me. He says this to him, God will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there, and if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be released from this oath, only do not take my son back there. So in other words, a breakthrough angel of some kind, a love angel, was sent ahead of him to convince this family or this woman to come back. But the cool thing about it is there's even a co-laboring there, because he says, but despite angelic intervention, if the woman won't come back with you, you're released from this binding oath.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
That is, that's real.
I noticed, now Isaac and Rebecca, they're first cousins.
They're first cousins. And
Dude,
Leah.
what was wrong with them back
It wasn't
then? Why would
wrong.
you go get a first cousin to marry?
It wasn't wrong then. It wasn't wrong until the Mosaic Law came in.
Next purity of the race.
That was real
Yeah.
Not only
common.
that, he married Leah too.
Yeah.
He was married to two first cousins who were
Well,
He
so
wanted
and-
someone from his own
Right.
clan.
poor guy.
He didn't want him to marry a Canaanite.
Well, let's really mess her up. Did you know that Abraham and Sarah were half brother and sister?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they had the
Remember when he went
same
over there and he said,
father.
"This is my sister"?
Yeah.
He wasn't lying.
Oh, yeah, I read that.
Yeah, he wasn't lying. So, anyway, all right. So then let's go to Jacob. Okay, we got Jacob and Esau, and by all birthright, Esau was the firstborn. So Esau was the one that should have had it to where it was Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But God sees the heart. He knows the heart, and he knew that in Esau's life, these things that he would inherit, these things that were his by birth, didn't mean anything to him. Now, he was the hunter. Jacob was really the mama's boy, if you really read about it. That's what he was. Jacob was the conniver. Jacob was really not the one that had the attributes that you would want in taking on the lineage, but he didn't despise the things of God, and he didn't see them as not like. So he was overly aggressive and did things that were wrong, but God saw the aggressiveness of his heart. Okay? And so Jacob has, a life to where God wants to use him. But think of all the things that Jacob went through. His father-in-law ripping him off, and all these things that Jacob went through. And isn't it really interesting that the things that happened to Jacob were the things that Jacob did? Jacob truly did reap what he sowed. So did God sit back and say, boy, Jacob, you just really ticked me off. I'm going to just give you a taste of your own medicine? Or was God looking back and saying, Jacob, I have such plans for you, but I need to purge you. I need to get rid of all this junk out of the dross out of the silver so that I can have a vessel that I can truly use for my own pleasure, for my own use and purposes. And that's what he did. And then he changed his name to Israel. Strive with God. And it's so neat that later on in the scriptures, whenever Jacob does anything in his own flesh, they call him Jacob. But whenever he does anything in the spiritual, fulfilling the plan of God, they call him Israel.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? All right. Let's see where we go from here. Okay. What's that?
I was just saying, I was just asking Byron today, why, when he changed his name to Israel, does the Bible not always refer to him as Israel from then on out? I could not figure that out. It mostly refers to him as Jacob.
Right.
I think, wouldn't you think that something that important,
Yeah.
they would just continue to call him Israel the rest of the time?
Yeah.
But that's really good.
Yeah. And so Jacob has 12 kids, And if you read the lives of his 12 kids, they were all messed up. They were out with prostitutes and tricking other nations to circumcise themselves so they can go and kill them all. And I mean, it was just, they were a rowdy bunch of guys. And then, of course, we know that then is born, the love of his life is Rachel, it's not Leah. And yet God allows Judah to be born through Leah, so that Leah then is the mother of Judah, who then the descendant is Jesus. So that's neat that he gave her that. But the children that were born through Rachel, who he really loved, were Joseph and Benjamin. And then she died having Benjamin. And you can actually go to the place where she died, and there's a monument there and everything in Israel. So there's these two. And then, of course, the brothers become jealous of Jacob, or of Joseph, because Jacob really wasn't very wise. When we had kids, we even in one kid's birthday, we tried to give something to the other kids so they didn't feel left out. Now with the grandkids, it's even worse and all that. But here Jacob makes this coat of many colors because he wants to, give this thing to Jacob in front of his other brothers. I mean, it's like, where's the wisdom here, Jacob? Do you want them to hate Joseph? And they did. And then Joseph, in line with Daddy, hey, I had this dream where you guys are all bowing down to me, So that really made them, feel like this guy's one of us. So it caused this alienation, and of course they sold Joseph into slavery. They threw him in a pit, and then these guys came by and took him and sold him into slavery, and then he was taken by Potiphar, and then he was betrayed by Potiphar's wife there, and then he was thrown into prison. And while in prison, he then interpreted a dream. Somebody found out that the king was the Pharaoh was having problems, and so they said, hey, we know a guy who can interpret dreams, and all of a sudden he goes from being a slave to being the second ruler in Egypt. It's a cool story when you tell it that fast. Right? But if you're the guy in the ditch, and in that ditch you didn't know if a wild animal was going to come and eat you that night, and it was all over. And when you're yanked out of the ditch by a group of people who spoke a different language that threw you in a cart with bars and other slaves, you didn't know what was going to happen from there. And then when you're thrown into Potiphar's house as a slave, is that your destiny? And then you go to being in prison, and they believe 15 years this is all going on. 15 years, that's a long time. And when you're going through it, not knowing the end of the story, not knowing the time frame, not being able to say, well, this happens for 15 years, we're on year 13, I got 2 to go, I can handle it. You just don't know if you have 1,000 to go. You don't know if you'll ever get out. You go through that. But do you notice that when God used Moses, he took him through those 40 years in the desert before he went and got the Jews out? You realize that? 40 years in the desert first. Because that's where God took him to school and created the character he needed to do what he was called to do. When God was called David to be King David, he had him running all those years, about the same amount of time, from Saul, having spears chucked at him and running for his life and living in caves and so on and so forth, because God was creating a character in David to be the king of Israel. And when Joseph, who was going to be the second ruler in Egypt, he couldn't just take him from being a boy who brought food out to his brothers. He had to create who was haughty and a little mouthy and didn't use wisdom. He had to create the character in Joseph to be the second ruler of Egypt. And we can go on with everybody that God ever used. Gideon, it was a little faster what he put him through, bringing him down to... Remember, Gideon was threshing in a hole. Did you know you don't thresh wheat in a hole? You do it out in the open. But Gideon was afraid. He was fearful. He was threshing wheat in a place because he was hiding. He was no man of valor when God called him to be a man of valor. And then God had to make him a man of valor before he could use him. So whenever we're, if we want to be a doctor, we got to go through a lot of years of school. And nobody is ever in medical school doing their homework at the late hours of the night saying, why is God doing this to me? You know why you're going through that. You're going through it so you can become a doctor, right? So why, when we as believers are going through the schooling of God to become qualified to do the tasks he's called us to, do we complain and say, why is God doing this to me? It's the same thing, because he did it to Moses and David and Gideon and Joseph and so on and so forth. So here we have Joseph now, and I want to read something. John Hagee, everybody knows John Hagee. I will tell you one thing about John Hagee. He's real good to the Jews in Jerusalem and in Israel. But unfortunately, John Hagee is very in with the Orthodox Jews, who are very, very abusive to the Messianic Jews, okay? And Hagee won't have anything to do with the Messianic Jews in Jerusalem. Okay, no. And so and there's also a, like Eagle's Wings, that ministry that gets money from Christians, very, very tactful to the Messianic Jews there. So just not everybody who loves Israel. And again, I think what Hagee's doing is great. I understand why he does what he does. He's trying to really get in good with the Orthodox Jews. So then, that's his way of trying to reach them. And he knows that if he alienates the Messianic Jews, he has more of the support of the Orthodox Jews. But anyway, he wrote this. Has anybody seen the movie Countdown to Jerusalem? Yeah, it's okay. It's not that good. But he wrote this thing on Joseph that I thought was so good. So let me read this to you. Parallels between Joseph and Jesus. Supernatural intervention here. You seen that before? Who said? Yeah. The names of Joseph and Jesus came from the same Hebrew root word. That's cool. Joseph was the favorite son of his father. Jesus was the only begotten son of his father. Joseph had a coat of many colors representing royalty. Jesus had a seamless coat so valuable that Roman soldiers gambled for it at the foot of the cross where he was hung as a king of the Jews. And is it Psalm 21 that actually prophesies about them gambling for his garment? Isn't that so cool? I mean, wow. Okay. Joseph was sent to his brothers in a field with food. Jesus was sent by his Father to earth as the bread of life, as living water, as milk for spiritual infants, and meat for men. Joseph was rejected by his brothers and sold to the Midianites, who carried him to Egypt. Jesus came as his own, and his own received him not, and was sold by Judas for 30 pieces of silver. Joseph was falsely accused of rape by Potiphar's wife and sent to prison. Jesus was falsely accused by the Pharisees of being demonized, a drunkard, and a heretic. For this, he was executed by Rome and entered the prison of death. Joseph came out of prison, instantly became prime minister of Egypt, standing at the right hand of the most powerful man on earth, Pharaoh. Jesus came out of the prison of death and instantly ascended into heaven, standing at the right hand of God the Father, the most powerful force in the universe. Hunger and starvation drove Joseph's brothers into Egypt to see the brother they rejected and did not know. Joseph was dressed as an Egyptian. He spoke as an Egyptian and married to a Gentile wife with 2 sons, gave him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph's wife represents the Gentile church, and his 2 sons, the spiritual offspring. It is to remember that Manasseh and Ephraim were given a full inheritance with national Israel. So, Abraham, your descendants will be as the stars of the sky and as the sands of the earth. Many people believe he's talking about the Jews and all the rest who believe. It's so cool. By the way, and this is really cool, so the 2 nations become one. Did you know there's only 1 tree in the world that actually from one vine has 2 completely different leaves that come out of it? One leaf is like really jagged, and one leaf is really smooth. And do you know where that is? It's at the Dead Sea. It's so cool. 1 branch, 2 nations.
Wow.
Isn't that so cool? Yeah. Okay. Remember that Joseph did not reveal himself to his brothers until the Gentiles were removed from the room. This means to me, he's saying, that Christ will not reveal himself to the Jewish people until after the rapture, when the church has been removed from the earth. Now, I talked to a Messianic pastor about this, and he was really offended by this, because he said what this does, if you have the theology that it's not until the Gentiles are removed that then the Jews will then believe, then it basically guts you of having any enthusiasm or incentive to preach the gospel to the Jews. It's not going to be till after we leave that they'll find out who the Messiah is. But it is neat that when his brothers realized who he was, they wept. And Zechariah says, they will look on him whom they have pierced, and they will weep. So there are so many similarities between Joseph and Jesus. But I do like what Sam Nadler said, and the fact that we can't say it won't be until the Gentile church is taken that the Jews finally believe. Because, I mean, if that, I had people witnessing to me when I was growing up, and it was a person who gave me a Children's Living Bible. Had that person said, well, he won't believe until after we're out of here, we'll just let him die in his sin unless the Lord comes back, So we can't take that stand. Right now, the Jews are blinded in part. That means not the whole Jewish nation. There are those Jews who are coming to the Lord, right? I think, what was it? I forget how many years ago. There were just a ridiculously low amount of saved Jews in Israel, and almost no Messianic churches. And I don't remember the statistics now, but there's a lot of Messianic churches. I believe they're saying now that there's over 100,000 Jews who believe in Jesus as their Messiah. I mean,
Well, Dean, I'm
it's
just really
incredible.
glad that got a good girl, good girl.
Yeah, I am too.
I'm glad she did. I'm glad she did.
So now we come, we're doing real good time-wise, and I'll get you out early. But, so now we come to Joseph, and Joseph is now the second ruler, and so he asks his brothers. And then this is the part that gets me. If all that had happened to me, and my brothers came the first time, I might want to play a trick on them, but I would have done it pretty quick and then asked, is Dad alive? Wouldn't you? The whole thing about sending him away, because when he sent him away, he didn't really have any assurance that he'd even come back. He might have just totally blown the opportunity, and then, tricking them and putting the goblet in their bags. And I mean, just all that he did, to me, I would just want to know, is my dad alive? I want to see my dad. But he didn't. But then Dad was alive. They had to go back and say, remember when we said that he got eaten by an animal? Well, actually, that was chicken blood, and do all that. And then he's reunited with his dad, and they go into the land of Goshen, and there they are, and they're doing really well, but they're really multiplying. And the Pharaoh died, and a new Pharaoh rose who did not know Joseph and all that he had done for the country, and he just saw the Jews as a threat. Was that a good picture, bro? So he didn't know Joseph, and so he put them into slavery. And for 210 years, they were in slavery. And then, I'm not sure how far I go here with Egypt, but here's one thing cool about Egypt. Egypt was truly an incubator for the Jews. Because you remember, out there in Canaan, if they were out there, they could have been annihilated just by the wild animals out there. They were only 75 people. They could have been overtaken by all the other ites that were out there that could have wiped them out. They could have been checking out the ites and intermarrying with them and diluting the bloodline to where there was no longer the pure bloodline anymore. They could have started to worship the other gods of all the ites out there and just forsook the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So basically what Egypt did is Egypt brought them to a place where they were basically in an incubator. Yeah, they were slaves in that place, but they kept everything intact in that place. And so God used Egypt for that place. Now, this just came, remember I told you I played golf with this guy out of Jerusalem, Barry Siegel? Well, he sends these things out that are so good, but this one came just the other day. And this is sad, but it says, Jewish life ends in Egypt after 3,000 years. The rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has extinguished the last flame of Jewish life in the country. The magnificent Eliyahu Havani Synagogue in Alexandria, where a synagogue has stood since Hellenistic times.
Wow.
The Hellenistic times, remember, it was during the Hellenistic times that they came in and they sacrificed the pig in the Holy of Holies, and Judah of Maccabee said enough is enough, and they all got together and they literally defeated them, and then they took back the temple, and there was only enough oil in the lamp for one day, but through a miracle God made that oil last 8 days, and thus we have Hanukkah. And Jesus spoke of the Festival of Lights when he was here. So way back before Jesus, ever since then, there's been a synagogue that has stood there. And they were told this year that Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, which starts Sunday, and Yom Kippur, which is the holiest holiday, the Day of Atonement, which is on the 22nd through the 26th, I think, this month, services, because authorities have banned them. This spells the end of Jewish life in Egypt, over 3,000 years since the Egyptian exile ended and Moses led the Jews to the land of Israel. The synagogue was the last functioning synagogue in Egypt, and now the Muslim Brotherhood has just shut it down.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll take God's protection off of that country now.
Yeah, yeah.
What little there was left.
Yeah. So, but it's so neat that, you know, like I remember one day, this was so cool. One day I got up and I was reading in chronological order, and I think it was, I can't even remember where I was reading. Maybe it was Ezekiel, I can't remember where it was. But I was reading and I accidentally turned to a wrong chapter. I got ahead of myself and I didn't realize it. And I read in the chapter about how God had poured out this flood on Gaza that went all the way into the Negev and into Ashdod, and this flood and how it wiped out villages and all this stuff. So I'd read that, right? And then I got up and I walked back into my office and I pulled up the Jerusalem. It's IsraelNationalNews.com, and it's not a messianic paper. It's just the Israeli paper. And I read how a sewer plant in Gaza had given way and flooded all the way into the Negev to Ashdod, sewage. And it was like, I read the wrong scripture. Had I read the right scripture, the one I thought was the right one for the day, I would have missed that. But on the morning that I read that in the paper that day was where it had happened. But to me, it was so cool to be reading about the Negev and Ashdod and the Gaza Strip and Egypt and all that thousands and thousands of years ago. And yet today we have the same exact places preserved. Can you do that anywhere else? I mean, it's God, and it is the supernatural intervention of God. So they remain slaves. Now, do I go through Moses? The 10 plagues? I don't do all that, right?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. And it's 9:30, so why don't I just open it up? But again, what I wanted to do here is a lot of the facts you knew, but I really just wanted to point out just how supernatural those facts are, how only God could pull this stuff off. You know?
By the way, if you missed that whole real quick spiel about Hanukkah, ended with Hanukkah, don't worry. Look, you come back to that and tell that story later.
Okay.
That actually takes place during the intertestamental period, isn't that right, Dean?
Mm-hmm.
That story about the
The Maccabees.
abomination of desolation.
That's-
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
That's
we'll cover
actually-
that in more detail later. But
And I actually
you're
have
sitting
a
here
little-
rattling that off, and I can just feel people going, "I say, huh?" You know.
But I have a little
It's after
Hanukkah
the
miracle
Old
myself,
Testament.
and that is that in
In
2006, I had a granddaughter who passed away of a heart condition, and Jim Hill was going to Israel that year, and I said, Jim, do you think that you could plant a tree for Sophie? And so he came back and he said that Beth Mibrock, Barry Mibrock's wife, had actually made these stones and carved Sophie's name in these stones, and they planted a tree overlooking the valley where the Maccabean revolt took place. And they planted them there. So the next year, I go to Israel, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go out there. I want to find those, you know. And it turns out that where he planted the tree, and I knew the general vicinity, but you know, finding a rock and a tree in the general vicinity there, but they had actually mowed that field down, so it was all gone. And I was so sad, so disappointed. And as I'm walking away, I look on the ground. I mean, this is a year later, and there's Sophie's stones. It was just mind-blowing. And there were 2 of them. She had done 2 of them. So I went and I bought, and you're not allowed to do this, this is illegal, but I went and I went to a nursery, and by then I had Kira and Bella. So I went back and I planted a tree for Kira, and I planted a tree for Bella, and then I put the stones for Sophie wrapped around those trees overlooking that valley. So for somebody who had brought pennies since kindergarten to plant trees in Israel, I got to physically plant trees. It was awesome.
Anybody have any questions or anything?
Yeah, Dean, could you talk a little more about your testimony and what made you sensitive to come to the Lord? And
I'll give you a real quick version because it's kind of long, but in a nutshell, I mean, I hated Jesus growing up because Jesus was responsible for the Holocaust. Christians all through the ages were responsible for killing Jews. So I hated Jesus, but when I was 14 years old, I had this dream that I was on this tall tower, and there were these soldiers, and they were trying to push me off, and I've always been afraid of heights. And I was looking down on clouds, and Jesus walked up to me on the air, and he said, Dean, unless you believe in me, I can't help you. And I said, I'll never believe in you. And he put his hands behind his back, and he said, then my hands are tied. And they threw me. And as I was falling through the air, I screamed, Jesus, I believe in you. And immediately I was back on the tower. The soldiers were gone. It was just me and Jesus standing on the air. And I put my finger in his face, and I said, I'll never believe in you, you jerk. And the dream ended. And I had this massive fear of death after that. And at 14 years old, that's when I actually got into drugs. And I was doing cocaine and acid and everything at 14 years old. And so I basically was a drug addict all through high school. When I went to graduate, I didn't have enough days because I never went. I didn't have enough credits because I were thrown out of all my classes. They called my mother in to tell him that I wasn't graduating. She said, he's such a pain, why don't you just give him a diploma and get rid of him? And they gave me a diploma and got rid of me. So then, that's when I moved to Louisiana to deal. And then I'd met a girl and asked her out, and she goes, well, you need to know I'm a Christian. I said, oh, so am I. And so about an hour into the date, she realized I wasn't. And so I had this job. I was working for Daniel Construction, building an oil refinery for Conoco. And basically, 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday, I sat in a shack and took down the numbers of trucks that came in and went out to keep track of the trucks. And as long as they brought me drugs or alcohol, I just fictitious, the numbers. So I really didn't do anything. And she comes in one day, and I had never read anything. And she comes in with a Children's Living Bible, something that was on my level. And she said, here, Dean, you don't do anything all day, just read this. So I started to read it, and I thought, this guy's a character. He knows what he's supposed to do, and he does it, and all these fools fall for him. And then for some reason, when it came to the breaking of his bones, I remember standing over the Bible, yelling at it, crying, saying, break his bones, prove he's not the Messiah. So then I believed he's the Messiah. So I thought, okay, I'm a Jew, I'm going to heaven anyway. And now I believe in the Messiah, I believe Jesus is the Messiah, so I'm totally heaven-bound. Everybody I was living with were all drug dealers, and we lived right off the Gulf of Mexico, and so every night was a drug party, but I started witnessing. I started telling people about the Lord. And so this one guy said to me, he said, boy, Dean, he goes, you're getting drunk, and you're getting stoned, and you're going to heaven, and I'm going to hell? And I thought, wow, Rick, you're right, I'm going to quit for the Lord. So I woke up the next morning, I said, hey guys, I quit. And by that afternoon, I was stoned. And I'll tell you, the reason I hate pot so much, because I could stop every one of the drugs but smoking dope. That is what got me every time. And once I was stoned, it was like, well, then you might as well snort something because you're already stoned. So, but it was pot. It was, that was the least of the drugs. It was the most addictive of the drugs because you could function with it, you could live with it. So for 4 months, every single day I woke up and said, I quit. And for 4 months, by noon, I was wasted. And then one night, April 9th, 1980, I went out with these Christians, that same girl. I ordered a bottle of wine. They were Southern Baptists. They didn't want the wine. I drank the whole bottle, got wasted. I walked into my house, and we were having a great big dealer party. All the dealers in the area were there. There was everything. And I did everything possible but shoot up because I hated needles. Now I'm a diabetic, and I shoot up 4 times a day. But at the time, I didn't. And so I remember crawling on my hands and my knees on the floor. I remember specifically the carpet going past me. I got in bed, and I said, Jesus, I can't quit. Just what Becky was talking about. I can't do it. I really came to the end of myself where for 4 months, every day I was going to do it. I laid there and I said, Jesus, I can't quit. I don't care what you do with my life. You can even make me a preacher. Because in my mind, that was like the worst thing that he could do to me. I mean, honestly, that would be like, I don't care what you can make me a preacher. You can make me that low. And so I said, you can even make me a preacher. I give you my life. And I was instantly straight. Now, I'd been smoking and snorting and everything that night, and I was instantly straight. I woke up the next morning, a whole shipment of Colombian Gold had just came in. It smelled so good. I walked out of my bedroom. My friend Tony handed me a joint, and I said, Tony, I quit. And he laughed. He says, Dean, you quit every day. Quit tomorrow. And, because it literally was that every day. And I said, Tony, I have been trying for 4 months to quit for the Lord. I gave my life to him last night, and I have no desire for this pot. He has taken it completely away from me. And literally, I became a new creature overnight. I had a filthy mouth. I never had to try to quit swearing. I just didn't. I had, real long hair, which was my idol ever since I was little. I didn't even want it if the Lord didn't want me to have. I mean, just everything about my life completely changed. So I called this pastor up, and he came to my house, and I said, well, tell me what happened. And he explained to me how I'd gotten saved, and I said, well, what about my hair? Do I need to cut my hair now? He goes, God tells you to. So what about my earrings? Do I need to take that out? If God tells you to. I said, what about my music? He says, well, if it glorifies sex, drugs, and things, I quit listening to it. And I said, well, what about the drugs? And I reached between his legs and I pulled out a whole pound of pot. And I said, there's a lot of drugs in this house. And you could just see the look on his face, like, we're going to get busted and I'm going to be written up in the paper. And he said, if God tells you to. But the guy, it was so awesome because he didn't tell me anything. He left it for the Lord to speak to me. So I go, he says, but I will tell you this, come to church Sunday and get up and give your profession of faith. So I did. And as all these people walk by me, Southern Baptist Church, this one tall old man leans over to me and goes, there's more, and goes on. So I come out to him in the foyer after. I said, what do you mean there's more? He goes, here's a map to my house. Come Tuesday nights. These were the Spirit-filled undercover Southern Baptists. So, 2 weeks after I got saved, I got baptized in the Holy Spirit.
In the Jewish population, do they draw no distinction between Catholics and Christians?
Well, and that's really funny because at least in mine, no, there was none. Christians were people that worshiped Mary. Matter of fact, my dad was he had a distributorship for 5 and dime stores in New York City, and he died when I was 5. And so I remember I would go in the basement and get stuff that he had and sell it door to door. And I remember once finding these hologram keychains that was, Jesus giving the peace sign or however he does it, and the Last Supper. And I remember being furious and running up the stairs to my mother saying, why was our father selling this stuff? And my mother goes, if he could make a buck, he'd make a buck. So, but in my mind, Christian, Catholic, it was, it was all the same. Yeah.
Is that still the attitude in the population at large?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I really don't know.
Hard to get through to.
Yeah.
Is your family saved or are they ostracized?
Yeah, my mom accepted the Lord before she died, and both my sisters have accepted the Lord. So, and then because my father actually had me when he was 43 years old, so he'd be like 90-something years old, and so that whole side of the family in Brooklyn are basically all dead now. Yeah. Who did?
Wesley, you still have a
You
question?
have a question? Wesley?
Okay. I thought I figured it out, but I'll ask you anyways. In Jerusalem, when you planted the tree, why was it illegal to plant the tree?
It's just they're under the law. No, really, it was a state park, and I guess the thing would be if you brought a tree in that had a disease, you could spread the disease to all the other trees and that type of thing.
Do you know if it's still there?
I don't know. I went back 3 times, and it was it was there when I went back, but it's been since 2007, so it's been 5 years or so.
Preacher. I do have one thing, but I understand that Muslims believe that Abraham took Ishmael to be sacrificed. And my take on it is the way I think they would think is the one worthy to be sacrificed, because that's what they're all about, and they think that Ishmael was the one worthy to be sacrificed, because they knew the promise came through Abraham to his son.
Yeah.
But I like what you were talking about, covenant. It had to be a covenant relationship for the son to come through.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't there 12 Muslim nations? I mean, isn't there?
Yeah,
isn't-
he had
isn't
12
what-
sons too.
Yeah, isn't
Yeah.
what he promised to Hagar, wasn't he even faithful to his promise to Hagar that he would take care of them?
They
Yeah.
have a wonderful promise, and that's what's so sad.
Yeah.
Because they have a wonderful promise from God. But the Lord showed me, because I asked him why did they rejoice, at the temple, at the Twin Towers coming down. It showed pictures of them in Iran places jumping, old ladies, jumping around rejoicing that these towers came down, And I don't know, God corrected me in something, and I repented, And actually, it was something like a Cain and Abel type thing. And God said to me, sin is crouching at your door. And I knew immediately what he was talking about. So I repented and asked God to bless that person. And God showed me a young man way off in the distance, and he was in biblical garb-like, and it was Ishmael. And he was like an adolescent, and he was angry, and he was saying, I was the one the promise was supposed to come to. I was the firstborn. Yeah, and God showed me it was that jealousy was that root of Islam.
Wow.
That is that jealousy
That makes sense.
because the anger that comes through that jealousy.
You know, the father heart of God is so extreme. And I believe you're right. I believe God has a tremendous destiny available to the descendants of Ishmael. Right now, it's not looking very promising. You know, I don't know if you saw the president's address to the nation today with the assassination of our Libyan ambassador. Then in Egypt, they're trying to storm into the American embassy. We literally need to really be on our knees. You know, this thing is just teetering right now, and Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, I think, is just the last straw. So, you know, it's something to really be praying about. But I wanted to mention one other real quick thing that I thought was kind of cool. I just discovered this like a couple months ago. You know, those things that you're just like, oh, wow, I never saw that before. But, you know, after all those years in slavery in Egypt, and then raising up Moses, right? So 75 family members have become 2 million, you know, right? And then Moses has to be taken out for 40 years in the desert. Who does he come in contact with? He meets this lovely lady, Zipporah, and her father, Jethro, who are Midianites, right? But obviously, huh? Jethro Tull, yeah. I thought it was the Beverly Hillbillies, but anyway, Texas tea, cement ponds, you know, out there in the desert. But anyway, so I always wondered though. Obviously, they're worshipers of Yahweh. You know, I mean, after all, after they delivered the Israelites, Jethro comes and like gives him advice, you know, on how to govern all these millions of people and so on and so forth. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So what is that? Well, I was just in this reading through Genesis, I noticed that when Sarah died, he married Keturah. And Keturah had several children, and one of those was Midian. So those people out there, not Jews, not in that line, they were Abraham's descendants of his son Midian, not with Sarah, but with Keturah. Not with Hagar, but with Keturah. You know, and it's like the family goes way beyond. Now, tell me today, who are then the descendants of Keturah and Abraham and Midian?
Right.
I mean, who are all those people? Right. Spiritually, of course, we're all ingrafted. But also, the family of Abraham is just absolutely enormous.
And
it's really
it wasn't
cool
it Zipporah that chastised Abraham for not circumcising his son. It was her who was on his case.
So they're actually following Yahweh, even circumcision and such, out here as a totally different branch other than the Jewish nation. Really interesting. Well,
One thing, Joseph was sold to the Midianite traders.
Right.
They took him to Egypt.
Well, I'm a little confused on that too, because in my Bible it says Ishmaelites. That he was sold to Ishmaelites and then Midian.
uses them interchangeably.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure what that is, because to me Ishmael was a different son than Midian. So I have to dig a little bit deeper in that, but that's a good point. So, well, I hope you guys have really gotten a lot tonight. Yeah, I'm sorry, one more thing.
I was just going to say something in regards to his question over there. My sister-in-law is Jewish, and she's from a very Jewish family, and she's married to my brother, who's Christian. So I talked to her about Jesus, but what we did was really sweet, because she has a daughter my daughter's age. So we've gone to the temple a couple times, and we got to know the people there, and it's really cool because it's very open, and they talk about a lot of things. And I'm so pleased because I knew all about the covenant, you know, the rabbi was like, hey, who are you, you know? So then what she did after that was she came to Christian church with us. So she's open by us being open and respectful where she is. And so my daughter and her daughter can talk on an equal level. And there's respect. So when I come to her and I talk to her about Jesus, She's not like, oh, you're all about Jesus. She's like, oh, okay, you shared mine, and I'll, you can share whatever we share.
Yeah.
So it's more of, I think that when we approach people from a non-judgmental and open point of view, they're more open to Jesus. So,
Yeah. And there's been such an effort to separate Jesus from his Jewishness. And when you speak of Messiah rather than the Christ, when you speak of the covenants rather than the testaments, when you speak of most Jews have it in their mind that if I accept Jesus, then I basically reject my Judaism and I convert to Christianity. When someone says to me, "Oh, you converted," I slap them. No, not really. But
You want to.
Yeah. But I 2,000 years ago, I heard somebody say once, or I read someplace once that 2,000 years ago, the Jewish Messiah came to the Jewish people, and the Jews wondered, is it okay to tell Gentiles about him? Now, for some reason, 2,000 years later, he's the Gentile God, and Gentiles wonder, is it okay to tell Jews about him?
See, I couldn't find a priest who would tell me about the temple. Because that, I want to know about the temple. I want to know, what did they do? What happened in the temple? The Holy of Holies, the pomegranates on your feet, the whole bit. No priest could tell me about it. So I went to the rabbi, and he was like, I'll tell you all about it. So, sometimes it's like you open the door, and you realize, hey, there's our Old Testament. There's all these things in there. And I was very open. And we had a great time. And I said, I don't want to convert you. And he was like, I don't want to convert you. And we had a great time. So I can see, the knowledge coming from both. And you don't have to give up. It's like you're just embracing it.
See, and I didn't bring this out, but this is so important. It's so important that the reason that God has kept Judaism, the reason God has preserved the Jewish race, is because, like I said, when he comes back, he's coming back. And when the Jews recognize him. So if when you become a believer in Messiah, you lose your Jewishness, then what are the Jews he's coming back to? Remember Peter and all those guys, they celebrated Passover. They did all the Jewish things. When Paul took Titus, he didn't have him circumcised because he was a Greek. But when he took Timothy, he did, because it's the covenant forever. All the promises, all the festivals, everything that is Jewish remains intact Jewish. And Jews are not called to quit doing Jewish things and become like Gentiles because they receive their Jewish Messiah. They're called to keep their Jewishness, not to find their righteousness in it, not their salvation, not to be better or even different because we are one new man, but the new man comes, the Jews maintaining that they're Jews because that's who Messiah is coming back to their land and to his people. So it's very important that Jews don't become Gentiles when they accept their own Messiah.
Well, what about us?
Mm-hmm.
You one
I
new
feel
man.
lesser. I feel like God loves the Jewish people more than he loves me.
If I die without my Messiah, I go to hell being born Jewish. If you die without your Messiah, you go to hell being born not Jewish. We both find our identity, we both find our righteousness, we both find our salvation in the same Messiah. I don't have a birthright that gives me salvation because I'm a descendant of Abraham, because like Jesus said, he could raise those up from the rocks. So we're one new man. But each race has a part to play. And I'll tell you what, if you feel jealous of the Jews being chosen, go through what they've gone through for 4,000 years. Like Fiddler on the Roof. Couldn't you have chose somebody else? So, no, but it's one new man. And God does not look at a Jew and love a Jew more than he does any other race.
It's good.
Yeah.
Are there any groups in the U.S. that support the Messianic Jews in Israel?
Yeah. I mean, Jews for Jesus, Chosen People Ministries, Word of Messiah, Israel Media Ministries. There's Sid Roth is another great one. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah.
So, I just want to say in closing here that we're hitting the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we could spend 6 hours a week on and still just hit the tip. I mean, the Old Testament, the New Testament are so vast. But I just want to encourage you, like I said in the email, really that survey book, which is kind of an outline with some additional explanation, and of course your Bible, the more you have time to read and to dig and to ask God to show you, the more meaningful all this is going to be. We're here for an hour and a half every week in this particular class to try to help with that and answer questions and wasn't Dean incredible? I mean, I think
Really
you're my
was.
favorite teacher. Dean's one of my favorite teachers in that regard, and that's why I asked him to be a part of this school. But so anyway, I just want to say that about the readings, and then with the first class, you know, again, those books are just there, like, commit to doing your best to read those books throughout the course of the whole semester, the 4 months, you know. Two other things. Secondly, email. If hopefully everybody got my email just yesterday. Sorry for the delay. And if you didn't get the email yesterday, please come see me afterwards. I want to make sure I have it correct. Okay, my records, so everybody get them. Tony Baker has worked tirelessly. He just emailed me tonight. Now we're going to have a video screen on our website, riverlifefellowship.com, and I will send you a link with a password. It's private. You have to have this password. You just type it into the little blank there, and then these, you know, just like it was on YouTube, but it's not so much clutter. It's just right embedded in our website. You can watch, and again, those are just if you miss, you know, or if you want to go back and catch some stuff and review it. That's what it's there for. The third thing is, I talked to Poppy, I was emailing Poppy Daniel this week in India, Joyce's dad who has the orphanage there, and he is thrilled about the idea of some of us, you know, as many of us as will trust the Lord, to go to the orphanage in late April is the plan, and he's going to pass on further details as are made available. I just wanted to just throw that out there. I'm really excited about it. This will be an opportunity for you to go. There's this youth conference there basically that we do, and it's about 400 young people, and you can do anywhere from, you know, they have like way too many meetings a day. So you can preach if you want to, you can prophesy, you can pray for the sick, or you know what, you can play with kids. They will absolutely adore that. As long as you can possibly stand it, you can play with kids and just love on them. He's got 120 orphans there, a boys and a girls home. It's a beautiful compound in a not so beautiful area in India. And so I just wanted to whet your appetite about that, cast some vision. And we'll talk more about how to raise support. You know, maybe you've never done that before. Probably be roughly around $2,000, you know, for the trip, which is really not bad. To travel to the other side of the planet. We might even get to stop through the exotic city of Dubai, as Marlon and Joyce and Venus and I did on the way back. We did a little desert safari in Dubai, which I don't know if you really want to do that. But anyway, that's for another time. So I just want to mention it though, and you'll be hearing more and more information from me about it. So cool. Does anybody have any detailed questions or concerns or anything like that? Well, great. It's 2 minutes till 10. Thank you so much for your attention.